and yeah, people can continue to join. My name is Lizzie Forward, and I am one of the event and partnership coordinators here at Young Not Broke. For everyone joining us for the first time, Young Not Broke is a community that empowers students and recent grads to take charge of their money through content and events. I'll be talking a little bit about who we are and what we do at the end, so stay tuned for that. Before we begin, I'm just going to touch base on the structure for tonight's event. So we're going to spend the first 25 to 30 minutes discussing today's topic, how to fund grad school, and feel free to ask questions throughout the event in the chat, and we'll have some formal time for Q&A at the end of the event. We are recording the session, and all of you will receive the recording within 24 hours, so you can go back and reference it at any time. In the meantime, please remember to keep your microphone on mute so we can hear our lovely speakers. Our event series is meant to provide all of you with opportunities to connect with and hear directly from experts and advisors. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Sarah Doran and Dr. Vicki Johnson to introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Lizzie. As Lizzie mentioned, I'm Sarah. I work at the University of Virginia. I've been here for close to 35 years. 20 years of those I've been working in student services. So I work in student financial services, and a lot of the work that I do is related to funding graduate students. So that's why I'm here this evening. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Hi, everyone. Lizzie, thanks so much for having me on this panel. My name is Vicki, and I'm the founder of ProFellow.com, which is a website where you can find information about professional and academic fellowships. So whether you're looking for a funding opportunity for professional development or funding for graduate school, we are the place to go to look for those opportunities. I'm also the creator of the fully funded course and mentorship program, and I help individuals find and win entrance to fully funded master's and doctoral programs. So that's my shtick, and I love to help people find funding for grad school. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you guys both for introducing yourselves. So to kick things off, we're gonna be talking about 4 kind of categories of programs today: professional programs, research-based programs, online/part-time programs, and fellowships. So it looks like most of you have answered our poll. So, based on so we're gonna try to tailor our content to, what you guys are most interested in. Our first question to the panel: what costs should you think about when applying to grad school? And I'm going to direct this specifically to Sarah first. What costs should we be thinking about holistically when we're thinking about applying to grad school?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lizzie. So as an undergraduate student, you experience very similar things when it comes to the cost to attend a college or university. But in graduate school, you need to think about the cost of tuition, your books, your supplies, your living expenses, sort of those standard things that it costs to go to college. But as a graduate student, there's a little bit more that you need to be thinking about, especially if you had been working or could work, and you need to think about how that impacts the amount of wages that you'll earn. So you need to think about the values that you have in your life and what it is you're trying to attain, and make sure that you're keeping that in mind when you're looking at the cost to attend graduate school.
And sorry, Vicki, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, sure. And one thing, we're going to talk about this later about, the impact of student loans, but it is also good to remember that you pay interest on student loans. So the total cost of your student loans will be even more than what you calculate in terms of the loan cost. So yeah, there's a lot of expenses included if you plan to take out loans to pay for graduate school.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. So it looks like based on our poll results, a lot of you are interested in professional programs. So let's first start off by defining what a professional program is. And then if you guys could kind of provide an overview of the most funding options available for professional programs. Sarah, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So when I think of professional programs, I'm thinking mostly ones that result like in an MBA or a law degree or your MD. Those are what I would consider professional programs. And primarily the funding options for those are going to be merit-based financial aid. So if you've got really awesome scores and grades and you apply to really good schools that have funding, you could win merit scholarships, and that's what you want. Other than that, though, the financial aid that you can get through the federal government are going to be loans. They are not need-based loans because there aren't need-based loans for graduate programs. So all of them would be what we call unsubsidized loans, meaning you start to accrue interest as you take out those loans. And then as far as a comparison to undergraduate financial aid, for those of you who did receive financial aid as an undergraduate student, in that package you may have had Pell loans or Pell grants or other types of scholarship funding that was provided toward a need that you've demonstrated. And again, that's not going to be the case in graduate school because your need really isn't factored into what they offer to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you're thinking about, a professional program, how would you go about thinking about, the cost benefit analysis of this major economic and financial decision?
So for me, you have to look at what you're doing the degree, what the purpose is of the degree. You're going to be taking time away from work. And so therefore, unless you're doing it as a part-time student or something where you've got an executive program, you're not going to be earning income. So you want to think about how much it costs you to attend and also how much you will not be earning during that time, and look at that and see what your earning power would be based on getting that degree. So obviously, if you want to be a doctor, you have to go to medical school. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to get a law degree. And so there are certain things that in order for you to do those things that you value, that you want to do in life, you have to get the professional degree. But like an MBA, for example, there may be jobs that would prefer that you have an MBA, but you don't have to, or your employer might help you get that MBA. So you need to weigh all of those things into your decisions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Vicki, do you have anything to add to that? Have you had any experience with, professional programs, or do you have any thoughts on the program in general?
Yeah, sure. What I usually tell people is that any kind of graduate degree that is leading you into a professional track, a non-research-based track, typically you will be paying for that out of pocket. Now, there are some external funding sources that you can apply for, fellowships that could be applied toward an MBA program or a JD program. The only challenge is that they are really few and far between. Often they will not cover they might only cover like a partial amount of your degree, and many of those are nationally competitive, if not internationally competitive. So it's not really a foolproof solution for, funding a professional degree. But like Sarah said, if you're saying I want to be a lawyer or I want to be a doctor, then clearly this is a step you do have. If you're going to be another type of professional, like you're going to work in business or policy or government, you may not necessarily need an MBA degree to do that. And there's also professional fellowships that could be just as prestigious as something like an MBA. So again, you have to think about, is it 100% necessary to get this degree for my career goal?
Mhm. That's a great point. And I think that segues very nicely into our next topic. But first, I kind of just wanted to recap what we discussed, because I know that there are a lot of technical terms that we're speaking about. And so feel free to ask questions if you missed anything. But there is minimal need-based financial aid available when you're thinking about professional programs. And the majority of financial aid is merit-based or scholarship-based or loans. And, companies or the military can fund these programs, but that's something that you'd have to look into with, your company or with the military. So this next question, I think, Vicki, you were kind of already hinting towards it. What would you define as a research-based program, and how does it differ from a professional program?
Sure. So a research-based graduate degree is typically a degree that will culminate in a research thesis. Mm-hmm. So over the course of your degree, you might be taking coursework in research methods and analysis, and then you're going to do either a master's thesis, or if you're doing the PhD, you're doing a dissertation. And what's interesting about research-based programs is this is where most of the graduate school funding that exists goes to. So there are programs that fund graduate students who are doing research. So that's one reason why you might want to kind of set your sights also on research-based graduate degrees in order to achieve your career goals. And do you want me to go into those other questions? How do you spot one? And
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Yeah.
Sure. So there's one like huge funding source that a lot of people don't know about. I didn't know about this early in my career, mm-hmm. and they're called graduate assistantships, and they're essentially part-time jobs developed by the university that are exclusively for graduate students. Many assistantships are reserved for PhD students because they're doing that for 5 to 6 years. Sometimes though, you can also get an assistantship as a master's student, but typically it's only for students that are in full-time research-based programs because it's basically funding from the university. They're paying you to help the faculty do research or to teach classes. Mm-hmm. And so it's just this hidden source of funding, but it is actually the primary source of funding for graduate students. So one of the things I teach is how do you get into these fully funded programs? And also a research-based degree doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into a research career. So for example, if you're working in public health, you might look at a research-based master's in public health versus a more kind of professional or coursework based degree in public health, because that might have an assistantship when it's research-based.
So you mentioned public health. Do the research-based programs kind of cover a wide variety of topics? Are they the arts, the sciences, oh, yeah. Politics, everything?
Yes. I mean, so basically the keyword that you want to look for when you're doing, say, like a Google search is, master's economics assistantships or master's mm-hmm. public health assistantships. Same at the PhD level. And at the PhD level, you could do PhD, public health, full funding. Those are some of the keywords that I teach people. Usually they call it full funding at the PhD level. Mm-hmm. At the master's level, they'll usually just say we offer assistantships. They don't usually call it full funding because usually it's just a portion of students will get that, not all of them. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the keywords you want to look for when you're kind of Googling and looking. But sometimes I would just want to mention a lot of university websites don't have specific keywords or information about assistantships or full funding. Sometimes you have to inquire with admissions, what's the funding that's available to graduate students. So that's just another important thing to know, not to stop at the website.
Thank you very much for that, Vicki. Sarah, do you have anything to add on the topic of research-based programs?
Sure. One other thing that I will mention, and I know Vicki won't mention this, but I'm going to give you a little insider information on, because I work at a university. But if you think that you ever want to get a PhD, find a program that you can get into as a PhD candidate right away, because that way you will be funded for the vast majority of them, you will be funded the entire time that you're there. And the piece that nobody seems to talk about, but is true, and you know, somebody may complain that I said it, but that's okay. If you get into that program and you think, oh my gosh, I could never finish my dissertation, as long as you've completed your coursework and gotten to the point where you've reached that master's level, you can then get your master's degree and then be considered all but dissertation. So it's kind of a pre-PhD where you haven't actually completed your dissertation. You still have a master's degree, but it was funded, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to start with my master's and then see if I want to get a PhD. So if you think that you might ever want to get a PhD, start with that mindset and then find those schools that will fully fund you to do that work. And then you can kind of see how it goes for you, because life changes, right? You might get into a program and then you find out that you're having twins or something, and you can't imagine having to do that type of work. But think long term about that when it comes to being in those types of programs, because you can get that funding at the very beginning if you go for it that way.
And Sarah, just to clarify, when you're talking about these master's programs in relationship to PhDs, how long are these programs? Are you talking like 1 to 2 years or more specifically for just your master's?
Yeah, so typically PhD programs can take from 5 to 7 years, depending on your dissertation usually. You can usually get to the master's level at 2 to 3 years, depending on the coursework you're taking and the program that you're in.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Very interesting.
Oh, and can I just mention one other tip too?
Yes, of course.
So also another kind of backdoor way to get say something like a fully funded JD or a fully funded MD degree is to do a joint JD PhD program or a joint MD PhD program. These are somewhat, there's not tons of them. And what they do is prepare you for a research track career in medicine or a research track career in law. So also just be aware when you're applying to these programs, like you have to really align your career goals as they're stated in your application with what the program is offering. But if you did get into a joint program, one, it'll be a bit longer because there's a lot more coursework, but potentially you can get fully funded for something like a JD if you go through a joint JD PhD program. It's no small undertaking, but it can be done.
Got it. Awesome. Okay. And we did have one question from Instagram when we were advertising the event. And it was, what are the programs that allow you to get a full ride or to that extent while being a TA? So is this the kind of program where you will get funded based on, your service as a TA or a GA or something like that?
Yeah, Vicki, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. If the graduate program will offer you an assistantship that you can have throughout the whole course, the 1, 2, or more years of your master's degree, that could potentially pay for your whole master's degree. Because usually the assistantship includes the annual stipend, which is like the wages for your work, as well as tuition coverage or scholarship, like a tuition, they call it tuition remission, but it's almost like a benefit of being employed for the university that you get free tuition. So that's why I'm saying you really want to find those master's programs where they offer assistantships to incoming students. But the key is that you're much more likely to find those in the research-based programs than professional programs.
Well, thank you very much for that. If you guys don't have anything to add, I'll quickly kind of recap what we've discussed. So it sounds like the majority of educational funding is going to these research-based programs. And as Vicki just said, there is a tuition waiver or stipend often associated with these programs. And, you're looking for keywords like research thesis or assistantship to identify these programs. So the next the next area I wanted to ask you guys some questions on is online and part-time programs. So I know they're different, but what would you say, is kind of the current trends with online and part-time programs, specifically when we're thinking about, funding options.
Yeah, so I can start just as a general rule, and this is true right now. As time goes on, I'm sure that things will change, and especially, the pandemic has brought out a lot of interest in online learning, and faculty members are learning how to actually teach better online. So this could change over time, but right now, pretty much online programs are not funded. They are how universities or the folks who teach these programs make a lot of money. The expectation is that people who are taking it will pay for it because it's easier to take it online. They don't have to move anywhere. And especially if it's a part-time program, then it's sort of a convenience factor that it's really just a way for the universities to provide the content to ultimately lead you to a degree, but it does cost you along the way, and there is not a ton of funding for that compared to what you might find with the residential programs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Vicki, I don't know if you have anything to add to that piece.
Yes, I'll just add on. It's true that both, whether it's an online version or a part-time program, these are geared toward working professionals. So like that's why the expectation is that you're either working to pay for it or maybe an employer is paying for it. So that's why they created these like hybrids. But I also want to caution you to be careful with online programs, because a lot of these online universities, they couch themselves as being more affordable, more flexible. But the problem is because there isn't funding sources that you can apply to, fellowships, scholarships that will fund an online program, then you will be ultimately potentially paying a lot more out of pocket than if you would just go to school full time and then be eligible to get access to assistantships and fellowships. It's not to say that all online programs are like not reputable. I mean, there's some of the top schools, Harvard Extension School, UNC, I can name a whole bunch that have really reputable online programs, but it is very difficult to get, you probably won't get funding from the university, nor will you be able to find funding from outside sources. And it's just because it's kind of old school. That's it. That's really all it is. But like Sarah said, it's probably going to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are some programs now that are coming up, like data sciences really lends itself to online programs, and a lot of employers really want data scientists. And so I think that you're right, Vicki, that going the route of talking to your employer, especially if it's a year long, like a 12-month program, if they really want you to have that credential, see if you can work something out with your employer to help pay for it. Sometimes they'll trade that for and say, well, as long as you stay employed with us for 2 years after that, then we'll pay for it. So I would definitely talk with your employer if you already have a job and you feel like this credential will help you progress in that particular company. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of that at the university, where especially, some of the new things like data science, where there aren't a lot of really trained professionals, and they're trying to get that up and running.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
And just to answer that last question, so as long as it is a degree-seeking program, mm-hmm. Loans are available for any of these programs that we've been talking about. And part-time, you just have to be enrolled in at least half-time to qualify for federal student loans.
Quick follow-up on that, Sarah. I know that a lot of my peers and classmates have been, interested in these kind of accelerators or boot camps in recent years, say General Assembly, or there seems to be a new one in my inbox every week. Does that qualify as a degree-seeking program? Because I know they're quite expensive.
Yeah, so it's going to depend on who is providing the content and their affiliation with the federal government as far as being able to provide financial aid. There are certificate programs that will provide financial aid, but you have to really go and ask them before you start thinking about how you're going to finance that. Because a lot of the programs, it's just not worth it to the university or to the organization providing that content to go through the hassle of working with the federal government and providing that aid.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And there are private loans that you can get for being a student, but boy, be really careful about those. The terms and conditions are not typically very favorable for the students who are borrowing. So just be really cautious. Look at what you're going to end up having to pay in the end before you sign on for something like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that word of caution. Yeah, private loans definitely seem a little daunting. So unless Vicki, unless you have anything to add, I'll kind of move on to our final program category.
Go for it.
Great. But before I do, just kind of summarizing what we said, they kind of range in quality and price, these online programs. They have minimal funding options, but they, on the positive note, because you're part-time or online, oftentimes they are more likely to be funded by employers. So definitely a conversation worth having. Now our final category that we're going to be speaking about tonight is fellowships, and it's something that I'm actually very curious about. I've heard the term thrown around a lot, but I haven't really understood what the program actually is. So Vicki, I know you're an expert at ProFellow on fellowships. I'd love for you to kind of speak about, what exactly is a fellowship? What does it entail? What are the different types available to people?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, fellowships are actually like a really big umbrella term, but there's kind of two main buckets of fellowships. There's academic fellowships, which are fellowships that do fund things like graduate school and academic research. And then there's also professional fellowships. And these often function like short-term, full-time jobs, or can provide funding to support a creative project or a journalism project, or even start a social enterprise. And so there's a wide range of professional fellowships that you can look at in the ProFellow database. I did 4 professional fellowships myself. I did the New York City Urban Fellows Program, which is a program for recent graduates to spend 1 year working in New York City government. I did a German Chancellor Fellowship in Germany, where I got to propose a self-designed project. Got to live in Germany for a year, learn German. I was in a cohort. And then I even did a mid-career Fulbright award in New Zealand. And again, I proposed a policy research project, and they funded me to go for 7 months to New Zealand. That's actually where I found my fully funded PhD program. I was invited to apply, it just led to one thing after another. So these professional fellowships are really interesting because they're very prestigious. They offer a really unique professional development opportunity. Some of them are full-time. Some can even be done virtually or part-time. So, and they're just in all disciplines: policy, journalism, STEM, engineering, computer science, VC, like you name it, there's probably a fellowship there. So that's another kind of, in what we have on the database, it's funded. We only put funded opportunities in there. So it's a possible alternative to going to graduate school. If you want to really enhance your resume and get more experience and even explore different industries or topic areas when you're not really sure where you want to be in 10 years, a fellowship can be a great way to just grow as a professional. So like I said, I did a whole bunch early in my career. I called it my career adventure, got to live all over the world. And funny enough, at that time I was working in public health, preparedness, and disaster management, and now I'm in a totally different career. So, but I really enjoyed that part of my life, and that's what I was using fellowships to explore that.
Very interesting. And so, wow, what an accomplishment. You've got to travel the world. That's so exciting. And you kind of spoke to your PhD. So just to clarify, fellowships can be, resulting in a degree, and is it always resulting in a degree, or is it sometimes just a research project?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Fellowships are just a funding award. So I was saying there are fellowships like, let's say the National Science Foundation fellowships, which can give you funding toward your graduate degree. And that's kind of an external body that gives awards that you can put toward your master's or doctoral degree or just toward research. And then there's other types of these professional fellowships, which are a professional experience. So New York City Urban Fellows, Teach for America, Peace Corps, White House Fellows. Yeah, it's a professional experience that's paid. And typically, you know, it's about maybe anywhere from 6 months to a year in length. And it's competitive, just like applying to graduate school. So there's a competitive application process, and that's why it's quite prestigious and looks great on your resume.
That's a very good point. And, you know, if you're thinking about applying to a fellowship, say, you know, one associated with a grad school program, when would you go about applying for that fellowship? What would that application?
Yes, good question. So for graduate school funding that is in the form of a fellowship that might be, you know, funded by a foundation or nonprofit or government agency, those deadlines are typically between October and January. So let's say you're applying to graduate school, you also need to be looking for and applying to those fellowships and funding awards at the same time. So you don't want to delay. A lot of people will, you know, do the whole application process for grad school, and then in about March, April, they're like, okay, now I need to look for funding, and it's too late because you missed all the deadlines. So that's why I say you want to look early. So some of those big awards, you know, you'll be applying to them at the same time as grad school. So yeah, you don't know what grad school you'll be in. But these are nationally, you know, typically nationally competitive awards. So, you know, even though you don't know what grad schools you're getting into, they will still be picking the top applicants, knowing that they'll be getting into grad school. So that's kind of how it works. It's a little odd, but that's how it works.
And the nice thing about those too is that, so graduate PhD programs don't typically make money for a university because they're funding you to go there. Now they're getting lots of work from you. Either you're helping to teach or you're doing research. But if you're bringing your own fellowship with you, that is a real value for the university, because then they're not having to pay for you to be there. And if you've won some prestigious fellowship, of course, you're going to be a more interesting applicant to them. So in addition to the money part, it is helpful in getting you into better programs because they like people that come with money.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it can also even help you negotiate even just getting accepted to programs or even getting added funding. So let's say you get a National Science Foundation award to go to your graduate school program, and then maybe you didn't hear back from all your schools yet. You say, look, I won this NSF prestigious NSF fellowship. So, you know, you kind of let them know before you've heard back so that they're, you know, put you at the top of the stack. It is very, very, I mean, the schools love that. I mean, if you got into one of these, you know, one of these prestigious funding awards, you probably would get into all or most. I should mention too, like for the, some of you may, I don't know, have heard of some of the big awards like the Pickering Fellowship or the Donald and Payne International Fellowships. There's some big fellowships to fund graduate school for people who say want to go into the Foreign Service, and they are full funding awards for the master's level. So there are full funding awards that are externally funded. The point I'm trying to make is there's not many of them. They don't award a whole lot, but they are worth applying to. I know lots of people that have won these awards, and especially if you're coming from an underrepresented group, they're looking for candidates like you. They want to diversify their candidature. So don't be afraid to put your hat in the ring there.
Good point. So Vicki, I think you touched on this briefly, but we had a question from Abby, and she said, are there any general websites to find fellowships? Where should we be looking for these fellowship opportunities?
Yes, my website, ProFellow.com. I'll type it in when I'm not speaking. We have a free database. When you sign up to use the database, you'll go through like a little profile process where you fill in your education level and citizenship and those sorts of things. And then it only takes about a minute, and then you'll be in our database, and you can filter the database by professional if you want to look for professional fellowships. But if you're looking for fellowships for master's study, you would choose graduate study. If you want to look for fellowships for doctoral study, you can choose doctoral study. And this is even helpful too if you're already an enrolled student and you're looking for awards for your research or thesis. There's even summer fellowships. There's paid summer fellowships for students. So all of those, get into the database, and you can bookmark them to your profile so you don't lose track of them.
Great point. Great point. So that I think that we'll kind of move into the Q&A portion. But first, kind of summarizing what we spoke about, these fellowships are sometimes associated with educational institutions, but often external organizations, like was mentioned, the National Science Foundation. And you're applying for fellowships around the same time as you applying for grad school. And a great place to look for fellowship opportunity is ProFellow, where Vicki has a large database of fellowships as they come in. Now, I see some questions coming in on the chat, but before we go into Q&A, Sarah and Vicki, did you kind of have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? I know this was a little technical, and we appreciate it because, it's a lot of good knowledge as we think about where we'd like to go in grad school. But do you guys have any kind of final thoughts?
Sure. I've got a couple. One is, don't go to grad school because you don't know what else to do. Fellowships are a great way to kind of explore that, as Vicki was explaining. If you're not really sure, better to dabble in something that somebody else will pay you to do. But my general mantra when it comes to graduate school, whichever type of school you're going to go to, is to go to the school that will pay you the most to be their student. Now, you may be going into something where they're just not going to fund you, but for for a lot of these schools, you want to go to the best school that you can get into that will pay you to be there, because at a master's and PhD level, they're getting a lot out of you being a student, and so you want them to fund you to be there.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah, I'll just say my big takeaway, just now being in my 40s and just working with and doing my own career. I've changed careers a lot. I've done a lot of different things, and really, you can have just a crippling amount of student debt from a graduate degree if you kind of go into it somewhat blindly and think about it like, it's funny money. I mean, you look at the number on the page and it doesn't quite register. There are many, many ways to get to your career goals without paying for a graduate degree. So one way is get into a fully funded graduate degree. So really look at those research-based programs, because again, even if you want to do something professionally and not research-based, a research-based degree can still give you that graduate degree to kind of move up in your career. But also, think about professional fellowships or other ways that you can kind of advance in your career or try different things without going to graduate school. Because I agree with Sarah, it's too big of even if you get fully funded, it's still even a time investment to go to graduate school. So you probably should, have a better sense of what you want to do. It's less of a risk if you get fully funded though. So then it's worthwhile to, if you can get fully funded, then the opportunity cost is not so great. So that's my key mantra is don't take out student loans if you can avoid it.
Great point, especially if you still have your student loans from undergrad. Great.
Right.
Awesome. So I see questions coming into the chat. I'll just kind of kick it off. So the first one is about merit-based scholarships. So what exactly are they basing your merit-based scholarship on? Is it GMAT scores, undergraduate GPA? And Liz asked that.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on the program. So for example, at law school, it's primarily your LSATs that will determine whether you get funding or not. But you really need to find that out from the school that you're looking at, because it can vary from school to school. Mm-hmm. But you can think of the standard things they have to judge, right? They have your test scores, they have your GPA. And typically it's some combination of those two things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. All right. And I'll just let you guys jump in as I answer them. So what are some things to look out for when looking at private versus federal loans?
So the terms and conditions. The thing about federal loans is there are provisions for being able to go into deferment or forbearance if something happens and you suddenly don't have income, or you have to leave the program for a little while and then come back. Payments can be deferred while you're still in school. So the federal loans have a lot more options for you to pay over a longer period of time. The interest rates, right now, actually, the interest rates are at record lows on the federal loans. And you have to look at the fees associated with some of these, look at the fees, look at the prepayment penalties. So you do have to compare, and there are some private loans that are fine, but typically the federal ones have more protections for you than the private ones.
Mm-hmm. And this is kind of based on my own curiosity, a quick follow-up. When you're applying for these loans, and right now you said interest rates are so low, are they subject to change over the course of your time as a graduate student and then your time paying them off, or are they set when you first take out your loan?
Yeah, so if you're taking federal loans, each year you take out a new set of loans, and each year comes with the new interest rate. So depending on how long you're in school, you could have 5 different interest rates. With the private loans, some of those will go up and down within that loan itself. It may not be a fixed interest rate. So again, you have to just really look at the loan itself and make sure that you understand what those conditions are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to thinking about a graduate school program, do you have any tips when you're thinking about planning or budgeting for grad school, no matter what the program?
So it's like anything else you do in life when you need to spend money on something. You do need to budget. The best thing to do is to start with, what do I know? So you want to be realistic about your expenses. You want to be frugal about what you do. So one of the things I tell undergraduate students all the time is, you really don't have to buy a $5 cup of coffee every day. Add that up over the course of a year and see how much money you could have spent on something that might have been a little bit more valuable to you. But start with a budget, look at your expenses, look at what you know, make sure that you are saving for emergencies. If the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's that we need some reserve. Be realistic about all of your expenses, and hit it head on. If you have something that you don't understand, most schools have a place where you can go and get help with budgeting, whether it's a peer counseling program or the financial aid office. So if you've never had to live on a budget, check in with some experts on that. Mm-hmm. There are also some really good online resources for budgeting. And Lizzie, I can get you some of that information to send out to folks about the different places you can go that will help guide you through things that you might not have thought about. And then you just have to stick to it. That's the hard part, is once you've said it, then you need to stick to it.
Yes.
I just want to mention too that I see people go into graduate programs without a clear plan of how to fund the entire thing. They don't have enough in loans, or they're just hoping that they'll figure something out by year 2. That is a really, really, really bad idea. You should have a clear idea of how you can fund the whole thing before you get started, because the worst thing you can do is get started and have a couple courses or a semester or 2 under your belt and then hit a wall, and that money that you've spent that didn't culminate in a degree has now been wasted, because in the real world, and the employers don't care that you did 2 semesters of a graduate degree. That won't help you in any way whatsoever. So just make sure that you know what you're doing. I see people enroll just hoping they'll figure out some funding at some point because they don't want to miss the enrollment date. And that's a mistake. I would say it's better to defer a year and work on that and figure that out before enrolling. So don't just enroll and like, hope for the best. That's a very bad idea, because it's very hard to get external funding for graduate school. If you didn't get it from your university, you really shouldn't bank on like, oh, I'll just work really hard and find outside sources. Now, that said, if you think you have a decent plan on working part-time, get a side hustle. When I was a PhD student, I did consulting. I, did all sorts of like side projects. I started my company. There's things you can do to increase your income while you're a full-time student. But if you're working full-time and going to school part-time, the cost of school is going to, reduce your income. And then you're not going to have any time for any kind of extra income making, initiatives. So that's just another thing to think about too.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so we have another question from Hannah. What would you recommend for a long-term or married couple where both people want to go to grad school? Is it a terrible idea to both go at the same time?
Oh, that's a good question.
That
Well,
is.
yeah, I don't know, maybe here, I have a good example because I have some good friends from New Zealand who came to the US and both went to Stanford for grad school at the same time. And I think they got funding to do that. It can be a good thing. If you're both doing the same thing, you can support each other, you understand each other's journey. Grad school is not easy. And also you'll both be under the same salary resource constraints and income resource constraints. But as a couple, you should look at the total amass of debt you may be accruing. That could be a crippling amount of debt. So you have to decide as a couple, is this something we're going to be able to handle? And then also, would you go to the same school and be in the same location? Because if not, that could also be hard. So.
Right.
What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree that if you both have that as a desire, there is some value to be doing it together, because, if you've got somebody who's working and at 5:00 in the evening, they're like, okay, what are we going to do for the night? And the other person is sitting down to write their 20-page paper that's due the next day. It's a little bit hard to juggle that. So you have to think about sort of the value that you place on your together time. If you can both do it at the same time, again, you're doing it together. Where it gets tricky is if you start to have a family and you need additional income. So sometimes one person may have to sort of stop part way, pick it up later, or do it part-time. Also, if you're doing a PhD, once you kind of get you through your coursework, you've got a little more flexibility in working on your dissertation. But I think, again, you've got to talk to your spouse, and you guys have to set up some guidelines for what's important to you and your ability to do things. Right now, we're all kind of stuck at home and people are looking for things to do. So it's a great time to be working on something like that. But I think it comes back to what's important to you.
I think V. Jackson has a question.
Yes. Kira, would you like to take yourself off mute and ask? Or post it in the chat?
I just saw funding for older students. I think that's the question.
Okay, great.
I can speak to that. I actually have a lot of older students in my fully funded course and mentorship program. And what people don't realize is that there isn't an age limit to going to graduate school. I know it might seem like there is because there's a lot of younger people that are in graduate programs, but there is, I don't know of a single graduate program out there that says, you have to be this age to get in. It's just that there's fewer applicants who are older and going to graduate school. But if you are applying to fully funded programs, and fully funded means that they're offering every incoming student a full funding package, and this is most typical at the PhD level, you would get, if you get into the program, you'll get the funding. It doesn't matter how old you are. The only thing I would recommend to older students, though, is that you have to have a really clear and compelling reason to be undertaking a graduate degree. And so sometimes older applicants, they miss this in their applications. They just say, oh, it's a dream to do this, but that's not a reason for the school to fund you. They need to see that you have some sort of post-degree goal. I don't know, you're going to publish, run for office, write a book, teach, like something. It's got to be something where it's really clear why you need the graduate degree, because the funding is for the research that you're going to be doing in your graduate program. So, they have to see that there's some kind of long-term outcome from you being a student. So that's just the one thing you have going against you. But if you have a clear career goal, you're good. And there was not one, but two people in my PhD cohort over the age of 60. Okay. They had things that they were planning to do after their PhD, and that's how they got in. So it's, there's no age limit. So I would encourage all of you who are older to really go for it, but just be clear about what your goals are.
Right. Yeah. And to add on to that, and talking to the folks, the academic folks at our university, they are looking for people who are going to continue academia, right? So they're looking for people who want to be professors or who want to be researchers. Things are shifting a little bit now because those types of positions are declining a little bit. But you're right, Vicki. You absolutely have to be able to give a compelling reason why you attending that university and doing that PhD is not only going to allow you to do something you want, but is going to be prestigious for that university. Because that's, they want their alumni to go out and do awesome things so that more people will come to school. So it's kind of this, you have to be able to explain how you're going to do that for them.
Great point. Yeah. I think that's also can help with one of your statements, Sarah, about not, making sure you have a real reason to go to grad school, not just because you want to do it. And that'll make you a more competitive applicant. Understand why exactly you would like to do that. So I'm seeing a few questions related to where to find scholarships. So this one was, what are scholarships that specifically fund MBAs? Do you recommend any kind of MBA programs for funding? And then as less specific geared towards MBAs, what's a proactive way to look for scholarships and that kind of beyond just an MBA?
I just want to mention that at the graduate level, they don't really use the word scholarship as much. So if you do get a merit-based award from a graduate school, actually they do typically call it a fellowship or a funding award. Is that right for you, Sarah?
Yeah, some of the professional programs though, like law school and the MBA programs do still call them scholarships.
Okay.
But scholarship, fellowship, departmental award, they're kind of all.
Yeah, the terminology can be used interchangeably. So there isn't always like a clear-cut thing, but it's good. Use those keywords. But Sadia, I saw you're saying that some of the databases want money to access them. The database of ProFellow is completely free to use. And I should mention too, I do a lot of events throughout the year, free talks on things like how to find fully funded graduate programs. Lizzie will send this out, but ProFellow has a free directory of fully funded PhD and master's programs and a list of also some of these external full funding awards. You definitely want to get yourself that. There's more than 500 programs across more than 40 disciplines in there. And, but I want to mention too, that it's even not an exhaustive list of programs. There's even more. That's just like the list that we could compile in a directory. And also, so if you get on ProFellow's mailing list, and you will when you sign up for the database, you'll get all the announcements for when I do talks on, how to find fully funded programs in different disciplines. And it's a great way, there's keyword searches you can do. You also have to inquire at universities and create lists of schools. So there's a couple things you can do to find the right programs.
Yeah. Google is a really helpful tool. So you just need to kind of find those keywords too. And I think you want to make sure that if you're going to do a professional degree, like an MBA, you want to make sure that you're applying to schools that wherever it is you want to work are going to consider valuable. And then I would do a lot of research on those schools to see what kinds of funding they do provide. So, you kind of have to, it's going to depend on what you want to do with it as to how you go about searching for it. But it certainly wouldn't hurt to type in, where can I find scholarships for MBA programs, and see what kind of results you get. But don't pay for those. Don't pay to get that information, because the schools can provide it to you.
Mhm.
Oh, and I also want to mention for MBA programs, yeah, some of the big schools like the Stanfords and Harvards, they do give out quite a lot of funding, but it is going to be for the very top applicants. So sorry, my daughter's here. Very, okay, thanks, Liv. Very competitive. Here she is. Very competitive. She's photobombing. But the other thing, if you're thinking about doing an MBA, just also take the time to look into other types of programs, like a master's in economics, master's in communications, master's in data science. There might be research funding, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna go on mute now.
Great. So yeah, I think that answers Sadia's question. There was a question about, do you guys have any recommendations for tools to help determine the return on investment with degree costs against their desired job income over time? So any kind of like ROI tools, or, balancing, desired job income over the return on investment of the cost of the program.
I know there are tools out there. I can probably find some for you. I don't know, Vicki, if you have any of those. But again, you may want to just do a quick, how do I find my return on investment? But Lizzie, I'll do a little research on that and provide you some information.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, you're right. Google is,
Yeah.
the most helpful tool of our generation. And I also have some new keywords to use as well. So I know we're kind of running low on time, so I'll just kind of breeze through our last few questions. So this one is specifically for master's and PhD programs. Master's and PhD programs that are non-essential. Example, MS in computer science are often seen as stepping stones to higher impact roles. To what extent is this still the case? How should one frame the cost-benefit analysis? I'll make up the cost time in X years. Are there any intangible benefit folks overlooked? And that was Daniel. And if he has anything to add about that question, he can come off mute. But I think it's mostly, what are the intangible benefits?
Well, certainly a graduate degree is going to give you more information about the work that you want to do. It can lead you down different paths. It can give you opportunities to meet people. I think one of the best things, is certainly at the undergraduate level too, is depending on the program you're in, some of the value of what you get is the alumni connections that you have. So if you're in a particular profession where you have alumni living in the area that you do from the program that you were in, you can have those connections and be able to get jobs, or at least get interviews, because you know them. I think that's especially true with the professional degrees like the MBAs. But again, the reason to do it is based on what it is you want to get out of it. So if you're working and you think, I want to progress, then have that conversation with your employer and say, well, what is it that you're going to want me to have? Or if you think, I would like to work for this company, I don't know what I need to do, companies will help guide you in the types of things that will make you competitive for those jobs. So some of it is just really figuring out what it is you want to do, and then seeing what seeing what it takes to get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great.
I hope that helped.
I'm sure it did. And I think we just have a few more questions. And this is kind of going back to the MBA conversation. Is ProFellow a good resource for prospective MBA programs, or is it more for PhD? I know you kind of touched on that, Vicki, earlier, but do you have any specific thoughts? Do you publish any professional program fellowships on your database?
Yes, if you go into the database, you can filter by discipline business, and you'll find both professional business related fellowships in there as well as funding for MBA programs. And you can even like type in the keyword search MBA, because there is a couple. There's like the Forte Foundation, which is for women. There's definitely a couple MBA fellowships, so definitely worth applying to. Again, nationally competitive, so there's not a whole lot of rewards compared to the number of people applying to them, but totally worthwhile to apply to. So yes, you can find those in the database.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Iris also asked, who do you recommend to get their MBA? And then I'm going to kind of merge it with Liz's questions, which is for people who went into their MBA looking to pivot careers, what advice, and they do not get their desired employment after, what advice do you have for those people? So I think that kind of touches the idea of, why would you go to grad school, and what happens if you're not meeting, if you don't get the outcome you wanted 1-2 years in?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Let me talk about the advice that I got from the Career Center director at the university's Darden School of Business. He's currently running the Career Center for the undergraduate students. But his statement, and it wasn't to me, it was to our children, but his children and my children, was that if you're interested in getting an MBA, first of all, work first. Work to figure out what it is you want to get out of that MBA. Make sure that when you do decide to get an MBA, that it's going to help you get to that next level. And he really recommends that you should get your MBA from a top school if you're going to do it. Especially if you have an undergraduate business degree. The difference between an undergraduate business degree and a sort of mid-level MBA from an employer standpoint, and this is what he's hearing from employers, is not that significant. If you have an undergraduate degree in business and you've been working, they feel like that's the same level as maybe sort of a mid-level MBA. So you really would want to go, if you can go to a top program, and then those typically will result in benefits if you're going to a larger metropolitan area. So for example, in Charlottesville, having an MBA is great, but it's not going to bring the kind of salary that you would find in a DC, Bay Area, New York City. So you really have to kind of, again, it's about what is it that you're trying to get out of it. Also, try to make sure that if you can, get your employer to pay for it. Mm-hmm. There are executive MBA programs that are primarily on the weekends, and a lot of employers will pay for those. So if you're in a job where they value that MBA, see if they'll help you pay for that executive program.
Great.
I'm not sure I know how to advise if you did a degree and it didn't really work out, except that work the network. Sometimes the fruit of that comes a few years later. So don't give up on the fact that it could result in you getting where you need to be. It might just not happen at the time that you thought it would. So keep in touch with people. Talk to the Career Center in the school where you graduated from. Keep in touch with all the alumni associations and utilize those things that you've paid for by going to that school.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Sarah. All right, so I see we're a little over on time, and that wraps up all of our questions. So I just want to once again thank our amazing speakers. Thank you so much for volunteering your time and speaking to us prospective students. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I so appreciate you being on the call today. And thank you everyone who attended. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you got something out of it. If you want to engage more with our content, please subscribe to our newsletter, and then you can do it from our website, and you'll be able to find lots of incredible content there. Thank you guys so much for attending. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and check out an email should be coming into your inbox within 24 hours with, you know, the recap and the recording of the event. So thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Lizzie. Thank you, Sarah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.